Welcome to the Social Network Society podcast, titled Talking Ties, the Science of Social Networks. The Social Network Society is a community aimed to foster meaningful connections among scholars engaged in research, teaching, and practice of social networks.
As you already may know, in this podcast series, we spotlight recently published peer-reviewed articles and uncover more about the fascinating world of social networks through the lens of authors. We also engage in discussions with faculty regarding their experiences teaching social networks to diverse audiences, mentoring PhD students, as well as addressing related topics such as maintaining a healthy work-life balance, navigating the job market, and more.
This podcast is brought to you by the Social Network Society Communications Team and is sponsored by the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Your hosts today are
Timova Shakur, Assistant Professor at the University of Wyoming.
Jason Ross, Assistant Professor at Western Carolina University.
And Andre Wang, a PhD candidate at INSEAD.
Before we continue with the episode, we would like to take a moment and quickly remind you to sign the petition that our co-presidents, Kristen Cullen Lester and Daniel Levin, posted on AOM Connect. As you may already have heard, the Academy of Management has approved moving forward with a formal proposal for a social networks interest group. This is really exciting, but the next step includes securing 500 plus signatures from Academy of Management members to demonstrate the strength and impact of our community.
You can help us by signing the petition if you're an active AOM member. You can also share it widely with colleagues, collaborators, and anyone engaged in social networks or relational research. Together, we can create a dedicated home for network scholars across the Academy, connecting researchers, fostering collaborations, and advancing the field. Please add your signature today if you haven't already done so. We'll put the link to the petition under the description of this video below on YouTube, but you can also access it on AOM Connect. Every signature brings us one step closer. Thank you for your support. All right, back to the episode.
On July 1st, we kicked off a sequel series on the academic job market. In the first episode, we walked through the mechanics of the search process, from crafting compelling cover letters and research and teaching statements to preparing for all the important job talk and campus interview. But landing a faculty position isn't just about checking every box on the application. Behind every search is a hiring committee evaluating candidates, debating strengths and weaknesses, and making difficult decisions.
So today we're shifting perspectives. In this second and concluding episode on the topic for the season, we'll be hearing from faculty members who have served on hiring committees and recruited numerous colleagues over the years. They will pull back the curtain on what really stands out in a candidate, the common mistakes that can derail an otherwise strong application, and the subtle signals that often make the difference between making the shortlist and being passed over. Whether you're preparing your first faculty application or getting ready to go back on the market, this episode offers an insider's view on the academic hiring process, along with practical advice on the do's, the don'ts, and the often unspoken realities of the job market.
We're so excited to be joined by two amazing faculty members, Dr. Brandy Aven, the Associate Professor at the Tepper School of Business at Carnegie Mellon University, and Dr. Kuwabara, Associate Professor at Gatton College of Business and Economics at University of Kentucky. Thank you both for joining us and for taking the time to speak with us today. So I'd like to begin today's podcast with two questions. So first is, how did you become interested in this profession, and how did you become interested in conducting social networks research?
Well, I guess I am kind of following the footsteps of my father, who's an academic, and so I in the social sciences, and so I've always been, I was always interested in research and this kind of a career. But this field in particular, I guess there was something in the air at Cornell when I graduated as an undergrad. And so that was 1998, 1999. But that was right after, Duncan, Watts, and Strogatz published their famous science paper. And people were abuzz about, this new science of networks. And there was people from physics and math and engineering flooding into the field and, trying to rethink and restudy what sociologists had been doing. And so Michael Macy at Cornell, who was my undergrad thesis advisor and who ended up becoming my dissertation advisor. He was also someone who really steered me into this field, and he, did an amazing job of recruiting other grad students in my cohort. So people by the likes of Rob Willer and Damon Santola and so on. And so there was a nice community of people just working on thinking about networks. And I think I just got sucked into it.
And we're so glad you did. Well, I'll go next, and thank you for having me. It's a delight to share this time with you. So I would say I got into this profession sort of circuitously. So I was an artist. I was actually in consulting. So similar to Co, I graduated around the same time, but my degree was in sociology and comp sci. And so I did the whole .com IT tech strategy consulting. And what frustrated me then and continues to fascinate me is we never had trouble with the tech or our budgets. It was always people, and it just felt like we needed better models. And so that sort of compelled me to go back and sort of study how we can help people. To your earlier question about like, how did I get interested in social networks? There was just sort of this constant thread, but I really do remember the moment. So at UCLA, I was fortunate enough to take basically a computational sociology course with Bill Bonasich. And it was like agent-based modeling, but very primitive, right? Like we had rabbits and wolves, and we had to set up like, different tit for tat kind of, very primitive coding. I think we were in like C++, and it was like seeing the matrix for the first time, where I realized like if we couldn't do counterfactuals, we could do simulations and we could model relationships. And all of a sudden, I was sort of able to see a lot of the dynamics that I think we all have intuitions about, and then how we might actually start to do have a science around it. And then after consulting, I did end up going to Stanford and was actually very interested in organizations and knew about social networks. But then, of course, Woody Powell was there, Mark Grenovetter was there. I did a lot of my early work with Karen Cook, who I also see as a network scholar, sort of contributing in that way. And so, that's how I got to be before you today.
Thank you so much for sharing these experiences. And I guess for all the job candidates and the future network scholar, one door they have to pass or push open is the job market, and being prepared for the job market to pursue their academic passion in network research. So based on your experience and observation, has the job market changed significantly over the past few years? And what do you think candidates need to understand about today's hiring landscape? So perhaps we start with Co on this.
I don't know. In terms of macro trends, I think, over the last few years, I think we have been seeing more opportunities outside of the US, and people increasingly looking at those opportunities too. While in the US, I don't know, I feel like things have become a bit tighter and more competitive, maybe less accommodating, or, in terms of budget cuts or hiring freezes. And so, those are some of the volatile situations that I think I've been seeing people having to navigate. But at the micro level of, each individual candidates, it's still always a tough market, and I don't know if there's a way to game the market. So I think, the challenges are the same. The basic processes are the same. I don't know. What do you think, Brandy?
So I would agree with all of your points. I would just add, I think there's also this interesting shift that we've seen over our trajectories as well, where by analogy, I would say that the corporate academic boundary in computer science has always been quite permeable, meaning like people go back and forth. Now, where I don't imagine there's as much back and forth, but I'm actually seeing more PhDs and more people thinking about, kind of consulting for, an Anthropic, and sort of more of demand for our types of modeling skills. I often note that, in my C++ book and undergrad, they made fun of sociology as if that it wasn't a science. But by the time, I had been out several years out of my PhD program, and I would imagine yours too at Cornell Code, that a lot of these larger companies were hiring directly PhDs from sociology. So I think it's shifting in its dynamics. I also think there's an interesting, and we're at this sort of very early days of, I imagine what we expect to is shifting with AI and sort of the process. And that'll probably come through in a lot of the other questions. But I do also think that's going to change the entire journey of going on the market for a lot of people.
Yes. So I think everything is changing very fast with the technologies, but I presume there's also aspects for being a good researcher in networks that doesn't change. So do you want to briefly comment on that? So despite all the changes, what are some core qualities that PhD students should strive for in this landscape?
I think really demonstrating, at least for me, two things. One, I like to call a sociological imagination, which I think plugs into the networks, right? That asking interesting questions that both demonstrate you understand the programs of research that have come before, but also able to map that and see novel applications, novel directions for the field. And so I think having that imagination and signaling that is really critical. And then I think having really good reasoning and thinking about it. I'm very, Catholic with a small c across methods. I think all of us are, but I want to see that you've brought the most rigorous thinking to the problem, as well as, thinking through what's the most appropriate, not just model, but methodology for answering this question. And I think that, to me, if I see those two pieces in a manuscript, that to me is a really strong candidate application.
Thank you.
I agree with Brandy, and on the importance of questions. These days with AI and technology and Google internet search, it's much easier and easier to find answers to whatever you're working on. You just type in a prompt in Claude or Gemini or whatever you use will give you some sort of coherent answer in most cases. But what are the interesting questions that we should be thinking about? And so having a nose for thinking about and articulating those interesting questions in a way that engages people, their imagination, I think that's really critical. And without that, papers that I review, they fall flat. Cover letters that I review, they're also flat. And so focus on questions.
Thank you for sharing those insight. And I think, but a lot of the times it takes a bit of a later round when in the funnel of filtering that job market candidates are offered the opportunities to showcase their intelligence or nose for this interesting question. So let's go back a little bit. So what distinguish candidates who receive those interview from those who don't, beyond this having the strong CV that showcase their past, what they've been working on, so that they can have the first opportunities to bring their personality and their interests to life?
I would say fit, and I say this with a caveat because fit can be a bit of a dirty word. Fit can be anything and can be the basis for discrimination or bias. But that said, fit including again, like likability or certain chemistry and connection, professional intellectual connection that you have with the people in the department and each other. I think that's often becomes the deciding factor. At a very fundamental level, we want people who join us and be happy and stay here, right? Rather than being miserable and thinking about leaving all the time. That's a waste of time and energy for everybody. And so does it make sense for this person to join us? Those are things that cannot be, I mean, that's an independent factor apart from their productivity and research trajectory and so on. So, it's a matching market. And, what happens in these hiring decisions is, there's a small group of people who are assigned to be on the hiring committee, right? 2, 3 people, and they have to sift through hundreds and hundreds of applications and pick out the best. And they are, accountable to the rest of the department for, pitching these people to each other in persuasive and concise manner. And so, they might be the ones who end up mentoring these people individually, or be responsible for actually recruiting them and getting them settled and so on. And so, yeah, evaluating fit, and I know it's a very amorphous factor that's difficult to define, but that's something to keep in mind as you furnish your CV and cover letter and so on.
Absolutely. I would also add, and I would be remiss not to sort of stress that we eat our own cooking. And what I mean by that is, just as Ko said, labor markets are matching markets and are notoriously noisy. And there's a lot of noise to signal problems. But as we find in, our own research, networks and mobilizing it really matters. And we're starting to even see this now. And I will just, and we can cut this out or, editorialize my own comment, in so much as we used to laugh in my PhD program that everybody studies what they're not good at. And so I'm sharing things that I have learned because I'm not particularly good at them, but, so what I mean by this is right now, I think a lot of candidates should be activating their networks, asking advisors and senior colleagues for warm introductions, just like, we would advise people, in a more traditional labor market to do. Those warm introductions tell me we're homophilous, we have third parties in common, which often can change people's perceptions of fit, right? And so it might seem either strategic or political or performative, but there's actually something you're conveying in that, right? That not only, that sort of spillover halo effect of association, but even more so by managing that you're going to have a career where it's about managing relationships. Whether you're a social network scholar or not, we all agree that they are important for, sustaining and maintaining a career. So it often will tell me how good are you at reaching out with people, maintaining co-authorship, so on and so forth in your early days. And I will say, as stressful as it was, and I came out in the financial crisis, so I can say I understand a stressful job market. Just remember, it's a really fun time to also grow your network because people are paying attention. They're reading you work. Keep those names, and follow-ups. Do all the what I say is and I mean this big finger quotes trite stuff, friendly reach outs, thank yous, all of those things that seem contrived politeness really do have meaningful consequences as these early stage people are building out their networks. And so I would say, as stressful as it is, also remember to enjoy meeting people and discussing your work.
Thank you so much. And I think it's just a nice reminder for all of the network scholars that we are people behind one node, and we need to live our community. So thank you.
So let's talk about all the ways that we ultimately screw up when trying to get jobs. So are there any common misconceptions that PhD students and junior faculty tend to have about the faculty hiring process?
So the one note I would disabuse people of that I think is a little counterintuitive is generally by the time you've been brought in for a talk or whatnot, you've met, for all intents and purposes, the quality bar. And so I think a lot of people don't realize a lot of this is, to Ko's point about fit. What are our teaching needs? What areas do we need to flesh out? And so I would just caution people of taking it as a, not getting that job or maybe not getting, a follow-up may not be a signal of quality. It may be just a matter of matching. So not to becomes too disheartened by that, and remember that there's a lot of noise in the process.
I would add 2 points to that. One is, so in terms of building fit, a lot of people feel that, talking about personal things, like your family situation, and again, I may be crossing the HR line here a little bit, but, talking about family or even your, personal interests and hobbies outside of work. Some people think, oh, that I don't want to, come off as somebody who's not serious. But, at the same time, again, like I said, we are looking for somebody, somebody to join who is going to be happy, wherever that is. And so if you are interested in this location because you're into rock climbing or because you're into surfing or, because you have important family member relatives nearby, I think those are something that will, you should not be afraid to communicate that to them. You don't need to dwell on them, but just say that, I'm really interested in this place in particular because of ... And, the hiring committee is always like, after making a tough decision between candidate A and B, they're also thinking about, right, are they really going to come, right? And if not, it's not just, oh, bummer, they didn't come. The department is accountable to the deans, the school, and so on every year, whether they get the best candidate or not. And so these are, all decisions that department members and hiring committee has to weigh. And so, any information like that you can signal, your strong interest, I think that can be a deciding factor. And then again, another point is one mistake some people make is not knowing anyone in the department, right? They're just, sometimes you just, this is a job market. You need one job. And so you send out your applications to every opening, and that's understandable. But, your chances are of getting invitations or flyouts or, an actual job offer is going to be that much higher if you know one person who is, maybe willing to speak on behalf of you, or maybe even say, I'm going to mentor this guy. When I co-author with this person, right? That doesn't mean you need to know everybody. You just need one in a department. But identify that person, and then, if you can reach out before the job market season, that's great. But even during the job market season, you can say something like, I've been following your work and I would love to, get your feedback on how to, frame my research statement or this dissertation, research. That's one way to, get to know senior people.
So, Cole, for future reference, people applying to Kentucky need to talk about basketball, bourbon, and horses, correct?
Sure, those are the biggies. Yeah, if you can say something little less generic, maybe their tolerance for hay fever, or I don't know.
Talking about mistakes and stuff like that, what are some common mistakes you all see in faculty applications and going throughout the interview process?
One, and again, a mistake is, I will say, in the job talk, because you have a captured audience and you've made it that far. And what I will say is, this is not my complaint, but I'll explain why I do think there is some truth to it. In multiple cases, I've heard senior people say they hate when rookies or candidates say in response to a question, that's a good question. Now, I think that's a little bit of hubris, but I think what they're really pushing on is you should have vetted your paper and your talk, that you should anticipate these questions. And if you don't, by the time you get to your job talk, if you haven't workshopped this with all, the people in your department and other PhDs and your kind of network, outside of your community, and haven't considered those questions, then I'm concerned about the level of commitment to the research, because this is generally a dissertation or a flagship paper for you, your job market paper. Now, there are going to be, I'm not saying all questions are good either. I'm not one of those faculty. I do think they're trash questions. However, reasonable questions you should have considered. And so it's fine in my book to say good question, but it shouldn't kind of feel like a reasonable question is out of left field. Then you should have a reasonable answer. And sometimes it's okay to say it's outside of the scope of my research, or I'm planning to do follow-up studies, or my data and my methods can't speak to that. It is perfectly okay to sort of scope out your research. And so don't be afraid of that. But I want to make sure you've kicked the tires in all of the sort of ways we would expect, in terms of theory, in terms of method choice, and then of course in terms of interpretations and results. And so that's one mistake I see. If you look like you're a deer in headlights, I worry about you in the classroom. I worry about you in our seminars, right? And so I want to see that you've really can handle that back and forth in a thoughtful way.
Yeah, so one rule of thumb is, of course, you need to practice your job talk before your first actual job talk, right? But write down 10 questions that you get from your audience, right? And write a thoughtful response, short and insightful response to each one. Chances are, at your first talk, you're gonna get, 80% of the questions you get are going to be from that list. And so, that's how you prepare. So anticipate those questions.
And I will just double click on that too. I often find it really slick. And I got this from John Paul Ferguson. So shout out, from his job market days. But often in my talks, my appendix slides are more than my actual talk slides. And if you actually can quickly click to a slide that answers that question, right? That looks, like you really land that plane, that not only have I thought about this, but I've, modeled it. And this is why this instrument doesn't make sense, or whatever, you're responding to. Now, again, that's gravy. You may not always have that. But I think to Ko's point, if you've thought of those 10 questions, think about, like, is there some kind of additional supplemental information that looks like you could back up that claim, that footnote, whatever you are saying in response to those questions.
Oh, now, so is it a Stanford thing to have those like slides prepared with clickable links? Because I've seen
Well, I think it's an
do it, and I
MIT
thought it was
thing. I got it
really
from JP's.
okay. Well, right, but there's the Stanford connection. Anyhow, yeah, but I
Yes,
think
yes,
if
yes.
you have those slides, I think it's a terrific idea to have those slides ready, even if you never end up using them. In terms of like more mistakes that people make in the interview process, there are two to me. One is asking questions that they should have known, or they could have just Googled, right? And so that's just a waste of time. Do your homework before you before your visit. The second is not asking enough questions about the interviewer. They don't have any questions. They don't show any interest or curiosity about their research. That's a no-no, right? And you need to be able to say, what are you working on, and have insightful questions about how did you get that idea, or what's the most challenging part of that project, or something like that. That can be a conversation in itself, even if the topic itself is way outside of your, comfort zone or your domain expertise, right? And this is, about learning from your future colleagues. How do these people manage R&Rs that they're working on, or, difficult methodological tasks? And we want people who are curious about us.
Absolutely. And I would say, I even advise my PhDs very tactically around this, to not only make sure they have read the most recent work, but even try to find working papers from that faculty. Because we all know, I don't know, has an amazing memory, but I can't remember what I wrote like 6 hours ago, let alone, 6 years ago, 6 months ago. But something I'm, currently entrenched in, am swirling in and, we'll find so to find those like most recent presentations, working papers, and then to go a step further and try to find a connection between your work and what they're doing. Because if you stay curious and ask, it might be about a method, like giving you advice about a certain technique, or even just getting their read on a certain interpretation or theory. But if you can find some way to connect what you're really passionate about and the research questions that motivate you to some, thread in their work, I feel like that often is more generative of a conversation than, being, asking like Taco's, I think, really brilliant point of like asking things you could have searched about, like what is football like at, Kentucky, or, what's the weather like? Like those things are actually, a waste of time to have in that kind of critical moment. And so I think really connecting to their work and sometimes teaching, depending on the school and sort of what their focus is. But in terms of research, I think that would, be something I would be really looking for.
Yeah, I think asking about working papers is brilliant. Like Brandy said, yeah, I not only, have I forgotten about most of my papers, circa 2010, but I don't even like half of the papers that I've written. And so I don't want to be talking about those papers. I want to be talking about what I'm working on right now that's due next month. And so I don't know. I think if you want to draw out people, I think that's the best way to do so.
And I would just say, in the age of AI, this took me copious amounts of time, but I think hopefully this gets expedited, right? Creating dossiers for all of the people you met. Because I realized too, there's a lot of churn, right? And staying on it. I mean, I would have loved to have an AI assistant if I was on the market, So I think you can instrument a lot of those, agentic processes to help you at least, get the material for you to actually review.
So we've talked a lot about things that applicants can do that are mistakes. I was curious, as you're reviewing faculty applications, what are some things that help people stand out?
So obviously, I think merit and track record, right? So if you've shown that you have gone through the publication process, now, I will open the kimono and say, like, I was in the review process. I hadn't even had a published paper. And so I think they depending on schools and their appetite, there is variance on what they will tolerate. But often, a rock star will stand out, but we also want to see like a pipeline or some kind of early stages of an identity. You can change your mind. You're not locked in, but we want to see that you've started to think about like what communities are you talking to? Is your research in dialogue with a certain group, and where are you going? Because often that also tells a story about, are you going to be a scholar, or have you just published a lot with your advisor, right? Are you going to be an independent thinker, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, I think having an elevator pitch is really important. I remember one of my thesis or dissertation committee members telling me, okay, now you've written your dissertation. See if you can summarize it in one sentence. And, it's a crazy thing to say because you've written this like 300 letter page document. And then now to summarize it into one sentence. What does that mean? But I mean, that's the challenge that you need to take on for yourself. Because again, the hiring committee is like going through so many applications, and they need to be able to pick out your application and say, Andrea does this. And it's interesting because ... And so you need to kind of like give that, sentence word by word to them. So they, in front of their colleagues, they don't have to figure out like, okay, well, she does interesting work about something that, I can't really remember ... right? And so people have to be able to talk about you in a way that's compelling. That's my point. And so, figure out what your identity is, but also your elevator pitch, your key phrase, key question.
Absolutely. I would also say, and this was different for me coming from a sociology department into a business school, but I would say just for the job market in general, try to remove as much jargon as you can, because often you're speaking across different audiences. And so, to Ko's point about an elevator pitch, the more you give it to me in a language I can use that an operations faculty will understand, that a business ethics faculty will understand, right? So if you're throwing in, different centrality measures, right, and different things that may not be universals across, an educated landscape, but I often think you should be even trying to think about, explaining your science in a more public, like your mother, or assuming they're not from our discipline, can understand. And again, tactically, I will say when I know I'm giving a talk to a diverse audience or a more lay audience, if you will, I run my talks through, Notebook LLM and have it create a podcast about it, because I find that it puts it in language that is more common, right? And often I get stuck in like sort of the jargon trap, right? But it forces me out of my kind of natural network speak, if you will. And so I think, also in your application, doing the work for the departments, I also recommend, if you know that there is a teaching requirement and what that is, I would even try to map like your experiences to those, right? Like, so if right, like here's why I could teach this, even if I haven't, I've had experience in this, TAing for, negotiations or whatever it is, but sort of helping people connect the dots. Because to Ko's point, you're not just talking to the review committee, they're going to have to take it to their dean, who may not be from their discipline, to other members of the college, university. And so the more you make it accessible to all of those different populations, I think you're more likely to be successful.
Thank you all so much. And I want to pivot back a little bit on job talk. We've mentioned a few things that makes people successful on it, right? Like the ability to be able to answer and anticipate questions. I was wondering, is there anything else that you recommend to help make an outstanding job talk? And is doing well on the job talk enough that you can pretty much screw up the other 46 and a half hours that you're on campus? Will it make up for it?
That is a hard question. I'm not sure I would say that. It really, like all good sociologists, I'm going to say like it depends, right? On how badly you screw up and how great your job talk is. But I would say, and I was trained this way, that you're also demonstrating your command in a room. And so managing questions, managing the time well, and sort of demonstrating that how you'll be in a classroom, because often that's a meta thing that we're all thinking about is, how will you interact with whatever our student population is. And so having at least enough of that kind of gravitas. I know rookies feel funny thinking that way, but it's okay to, put off a question, or to say, I'm going to hold questions to the end, but to sort of set the pace and take that leadership role at the front of that, classroom, if you will, when you present, I think really is important. So, to Ko's point of like lots of practice and being really comfortable. I often laugh. I taught yoga all through grad school, and it was probably the best preparation for the job market for me, because you really learn to read a room. Like everybody's annoyed at you, everybody's sweaty. You start to pick up on those cues, but sort of you should have, enough command of the material that you can, manage the room in that capacity.
Well, in looking at my own experience, I don't think I've given a really great job talk. And so, what I would say is it's still possible to get jobs, despite a mediocre talk. That said, do the best you can to polish your talk, and again, be ready for difficult questions. I think and like Brandy said, it's not just an academic presentation. People are also looking to see if you can teach in front of, teach, of course, undergrads, but also, exec programs or MBAs if you're that department has those programs. And so is there somebody who can stand in front of, a diverse audience and teach something new and important in an impactful way? That's what they're looking for. And so just like, it's not simply about having the right answer, but also like being able to field questions. If the questions are not relevant, then you can punt it. You can make connections between questions from different audience members. So those are things that you want to be mindful of as you prepare for your talk. I think the talks that I often enjoy are ones that feel more like a dialogue between, the presenter and so they're not just shouting at everybody in the audience at the same time. They're, usually like focused on one person and then another person next. And so having like a series of conversations, I think that makes it more, I don't know, exciting and accessible and engaging for me.
Thank you all so much for sharing your experiences on the job talk.
Absolutely. Can I give my last pro tip?
Sure.
Go for it.
It is a marathon. Hand sanitizer, vitamin C, hydrate. Like, you do not want to get sick. And I know it sounds ridiculous, but like, I give little like health packs to my, rookies, because like there's no opportunity for downtime. It is a marathon. So just like, wear a mask on the plane, because if you get sick, it can derail you, and you don't know if that opportunity, sometimes things change really quickly. And so you might get like a last minute fly out. And so really, you should always protect your health, but this is a critical time where you should be extra diligent. So I would definitely stress that as well.
Yeah, take care of yourself. Very important.
That's a great advice. Can you tell us a little bit more about the deliberations after the job talk? If you could share any insights about what happens in the room now that the job talk is concluded and the department is discussing candidates.
So I'll share something that I think. So generally, we talk about by this point, we've evaluated the packet, right? And so now it's about the interactions. And so generally, if we saw a reasonable job talk, we're talking about, we're comparing them to other candidates in terms of fit. But I will say that be very cognizant of all of the conversations that you have, because we've had situations where candidates have been with PhD students and said things that we didn't think were appropriate to say to PhDs, and that we ask our PhDs, they're part of the process. So everybody is, I've heard, Duolingo, which is here, will even actually your cab driver, with our cab driver doesn't work for us, but we will try to get as much information about you, about, is it respectful? Is it thoughtful? Would you be a good community member? And so I would say that is something to keep in mind, that all of your interactions are part of that feedback process. And so that will affect, if you had a bad interaction with a colleague, even if I thought you were a great candidate, it's going to give me a lot of pause before I advocate for you.
Yeah, I think it's just gathering information, talking, a lot of like hallway conversations or behind the doors, getting each other's reactions. And, some people might be strategizing their votes that are going to happen in the next few days. And so, yeah, just people gauging each other. Also, like, if there's any additional information that we want to get, we'll talk about, right? What else do we need to know about this person, and who can we contact? That kind of stuff.
I will also add that in my experience, I've seen sort of two ways, and I just want to kind of stress that these are maybe two different frames that, for an array of reasons, might vary how applicants think about different departments or groups. But in some cases, it can be just like a vote of confidence, like how many people are excited, right? So just sort of a binary. But we've had applicants where one or two faculty are just so excited about a particular candidate that actually carries the day. And so it can also be, it's not just like bean counting, right? It could also be the magnitude of, if you have I think Co made the point earlier, if you have like one advocate who is just gunning for you, that can be very different. Even if you would have, maybe not have gotten the majority vote, but it can sway a lot of opinions at least in the groups I've been a member of.
Is this the moment where recommendations start mattering a lot, or do the recommendations matter before you invite the person for a job talk?
I would say before. They're definitely part of our vetting process. We will often, read the letters very carefully. And then, even if there's a personal relationship and there's some need for clarification, or, just richer, we're really interested in the candidate, we just kind of want to get, take the temperature of how interested they are in us, we'll reach out to the letter writer. And so I think after the fact, hopefully we've had the, once we're deliberating, unless it's something about like concerns about like, can we, if they were to come here, do we have the resources to help them, right? Whatever that is, to make sure that we're in a good position to really, because we also want to make sure we can really support you in your career, and that we hope you can get tenure at our institutions and that we can co-author with you. And so there's an investment there that we want to make sure we have the resources for you to be successful. But yeah, the letters for us would be before even the job, the fly out.
Okay. Thank you for sharing.
I think different schools have different policies. So some schools want, or cannot start reviewing applicants until everything is in. Like the computer system doesn't actually release the applications until everything is in. Other places it's more informal. And so, I don't know how that affects the applicants, but. And then in terms of the recommendation letters themselves, I try not to weigh them as much as, well, I don't know. I mean, I read them, of course, but, personally, I feel like in terms of the content, it's pretty much the same unless they're going to say something that's a red flag or something that explains maybe like a hole in their CV or like a failed project or something like that. That's important information, but apart from those types of information, I take recommendation letters with a grain of salt. It's your job to make sure that your letter writer writes something positive about you. And so, if you've worked with them, if you've gotten to know them, and, you've been open to them, then chances are they will. But if they cannot write a good letter, then, they should say there might be better people for this than me. Hopefully people do that, but do your due diligence, I guess.
Thank you both for sharing. And I see we're almost out of time, so we have one last concluding question.
Yeah, so thank you so much. So if we give the benefits and the technology of time travel, and you're going back in time and for you and going on the job market, and given all the knowledge you have right now, what advice would you give for yourself thinking back in time?
That's a great question. A little triggering thinking about going back to it. So I'm sympathetic to the process. I would say, and this is something I continue to struggle with, and maybe plugs in a bit to Jason's work, is at this point in my career, even looking back, is I was fortunate enough accidentally to really end up creating a lot of what I would say are formative ties in my network. And I wish I had been a little bit more conscientious of that and maintaining those ties to mentors and whatnot. I was a little sloppy and, ham-fisted in it. But I wish I had been a little bit more systematic on sort of maintaining those ties. And I know Co is, thinking about this, it is a challenge of time maintenance, and it's so hard to see at the beginning of your career how instrumental those types of connections will be just for I mean, we now know for, your well-being and happiness. And I can speak to that. Co has been a huge, tie for me, both professionally and my mental health. But really making sure you're maintaining those, because those people are now part of their community. They brought you out, or they reached out to you or met with you because they thought your research was interesting. They may not have had a job, or maybe they were hiring for some other specialty that you are not able to fulfill. But I think I wish I had been a little bit more conscientious about maintaining those ties, but and I'm still learning to do that, so.
Yeah, it's very hard, very hard. I've made the same mistake, and especially after like getting rejected from school, and it's just very awkward to, bump into those people at academy, let alone like reach out and say, oh, how's your project going, or whatever else that you talked about. But people departments make decisions for a number of reasons, and usually they are not personal decisions, and so don't take things personally, and don't reject department members because of uh, you know a job that didn't work out. Yeah, they're gonna be in your community going forward, and so you need to stay in touch and continue building relationships.
Yeah, and I don't know who originally said this, so I can't, attribute it correctly. But I mean, I definitely live by it, and I tell it to, all candidates that come through is we make commitments to people, not organizations. And so it's, about that community. Like you may not decide to come to Carnegie Mellon, right? Or it may not be the right fit, but that doesn't mean at Academy, I won't be thrilled to see you. And, these careers are long, right? And so if I was interested in your work, even if you didn't end up getting a job at CMU, doesn't mean I won't be thrilled to talk to you about it in the future. So yeah, commitments to people, not institutions. I think some of my most critical, relationships were with, like, Co and I weren't on the market at the same time, but you often think you're in competition with those people, but that is actually not true. And I was lucky enough to have other people who were on the market with me who actually reached out, and we would share information, again using our networks. And here's the questions they ask at Yale, right? Here are the, and we shared as much information as we could, with this idea of, like, that allowed us to level up our performance, if you will, right? Because we could anticipate different types of questions. It gave us richer information. And I do think it helped us sort into, like, the right roles for both of us. So, coopetition is definitely helpful, even in our market.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah,
No,
when
of
I was on the
course.
market, there were 6 of us from NYU or something along those lines, 4 or 6, a
Oh,
lot of
wow.
people. And I don't remember us particularly talking and to each other and sharing information. That would have been so useful.
I think, I mean, honestly, I think that is more stressful because you're more, like, feel directly in competition. But if it's somebody at another school, right, like, they can share, like, especially if you're both also looking to hire, right? Because you can share, because PhD students often have a lot of knowledge in their department about what they're looking for, right? And can share a lot of that information. So I do think it's hard when you're in the same department because you feel so structurally, like, exacerbates that competitive stress. But
And we have the Google Sheet now. So
okay, but that can
That's
stress you
right.
out too. I find that, like, that's a mixed bag.
So
And
that's the
we all
thing.
know that's not the same thing as networking, right?
No, no, no. But I would say I would say the benefit of now is that we have the secretive and everybody known Google Sheet.
Well, we should let you go. We don't want to take too much of your time. Thank you both so much for taking the time to chat with us about this. And we hope that you would come back to the show at some point and talk to us about your own research.
I
Thank
would
you.
love that. This was
Definitely.
delightful. Thank you for having us. A real treat.
Yeah, thank you for putting this together. Well done.
I know. I wish I had had this when we were on the market.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure the PhD students and the postdocs on the market will benefit a lot from all the great advice that you shared with us today. Thank you.
Thank you. And good luck to
Thank you.
everyone.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank you, guys.
you. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
This episode concludes our sequel on the job market. We hope that it's helpful to everyone who is going to the job market this year.
Everyone ready to roll the dice.
Yeah. Yeah. For what it's worth, this job market looks promising. I think there are a lot of schools. I looked in the Google Doc and there are a lot of postings this year. So hopefully it's a good market.
Yeah, fingers crossed for all the candidates. So wish them all the best luck.
If you listen to this episode and you have any questions about the job market, applications, or anything we discussed, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to share our experience on the job market, and I'm sure our panelists will also be open to help out in whatever way they can.
I was just going to add in someone to commiserate with. You know, if you have a rough enough market, you need that individual, you need that social support that's out there. So
that was a great piece of advice, because when I was on the market, I actually had a friend who I met maybe in my third year as a PhD student, and I called her and I was so excited. Oh my God, I have a job talk in your school. And she told me, you know, what they care for, who asks really difficult questions that I should be, you know, ready mentally for. So that was really useful. And I'm so glad that Brandy brought it up. Jason, did you have a buddy?
I did not. No.
No.
I wish that I had. It would have been a lot more useful.
Yeah. Yeah, communities matter a lot. Anything else? All right.
If you like today's episode, please like and subscribe to our podcast. We're looking forward to getting your feedback. If you have any suggestions, feel free to email us at communications.sns@gmail.com. We look forward to touching base with you.
Thanks for listening.